Okay, we're live. So we've got an expert panel here today. We're looking at the future of the education sector, reconfiguring the new normal. Is the future bright, and is the future virtual? Lots of things to discuss. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions and comments from the panel for the panel. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do is for each of the panel members just to introduce themselves. If we could start with Will.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Will Locke. I'm Director of International for Century Tech. And Century is an online learning platform and resource that uses the latest in AI technology, neuroscience and learning science to deliver a personalized learning journey for every student. And we've been, if I'm allowed to expand a little bit, we've been running for about 8 years. And Priya, our founder, launched us really because, yes, we believe that every student deserves a world-class education tailored to their individual needs, and felt that technology at that time really wasn't fulfilling the promise and the opportunity that it had, and that teachers' lives and workloads were increasing. They weren't benefiting from a lot of the technology, and felt that there was more that could be offered. And so we've been on that journey for the last 8 years, and really interested to talk through some of our learnings over that time and more recently today.
Okay, thanks, Will. That's great. Gibran, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Gibran Jamshed. I'm part of Microsoft Pakistan. I'm the country education lead and working very closely with the academic sector in Pakistan, both public and private sector customers. And it's been a ride and a journey since last 3 months, since the pandemic has begun. So looking forward towards sharing our thoughts, how Microsoft is contributing in Pakistan in helping customers empower their students with remote learning solutions.
Excellent. Thank you, Gibran. And certainly not last but not least, James.
Okay, thanks, Sean. I'm James Neal. I'm the International Director for GL Education. We're one of the leading assessment providers based here in the UK. A history of 35 years of providing assessments that support teaching and learning across the K-12. Internationally, we now work with just under 2,000 schools across the world, providing a range of assessments that are many familiar names to schools: the CAT4, progress tests, PASS, looking at students' well-being, and a variety of special needs. Obviously, at the moment, the use of data to support teaching and personalisation is becoming a topical debate and topical subject as schools have moved virtually. And the team we have around the world have been working very hard, not just in Pakistan, but globally.
Excellent. Thanks, James. So let's just kind of turn the clock back a bit. And, it was around February, March time when things started to change and people started to realize that things would quickly go into lockdown. In the UAE, it was on March the 1st, things started to change. And I think in Pakistan, Gibran, correct me if I'm wrong, it was towards the end of March when things started to go into lockdown. So obviously a lot has happened since then. We've seen teachers quickly change and adapt overnight, and a lot of pressure put onto teachers to try and deliver online learning. We've seen parents kind of thrust into the mix of doing online schooling, and for a lot of parents grappling with different technological platforms, apps, and then we've seen children as well, obviously thrown into a very different situation from their current school. So what I'd like to start with is just by firstly asking you, James, what do you think are the key learnings from the past 4 or 5 months? What are the key takeaways for you?
Well, from an organisation that's working with schools, we've had to adapt ourselves quite considerably. Obviously, here in London, our office is closed, and we had to find ways to carry on supporting schools. So internally, we have learned a lot, which I think is fairly similar to how schools have had to respond. In many of my team are home-based. I've had to start conducting meetings, and my team have conducted meetings in a virtual environment. So the lessons we've learned, I think, have been quite similar to the schools in how do you manage those relationships in a distant environment in challenging times. Looking back and talking to many of our schools around the world and here in the UK, the key things that have come up is the relationships between teachers and students. You can really see how that's become one of the things we've had to learn and appreciate. Many of my friends with children themselves have started to really appreciate how important teaching is and the challenge of the teaching role, as they've had to become home teachers while managing a job and cooking and everything else that they've needed to do. The other thing that's really come up that I'm sure we'll talk about later is the disparity between students from different backgrounds of, do they have facilities and support and a safe space at home to learn? And again, that's been mirrored not just in the school system, but in any company that's had to send their staff home. Are we all equipped to be able to work remotely and support each other?
Yeah, I mean, we've had to shift to digital pretty much overnight. I know just from my from my personal perspective, I've had to relearn how to use technology in so many different ways, just because we've been forced into the situation. But Gibran, what I'd like to hear from you really is, what are your key learnings, and from the perspective of what's happened on the ground in Pakistan, and perhaps some of the issues are unique to Pakistan in terms of the access and perhaps some of the issues that James has alluded to, because there might be similarities between the UK and Pakistan in that respect. But what are your key takeaways from the past few months?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to wish all the parents, teachers, and the community of City School, and in fact, all the education community in Pakistan, that they should stay safe, and obviously they should be taking all these extra measures, because these days the rate of COVID and the contraction is picking up slowly and gradually, and now it is going towards the peak. So when we started off this discussion towards the mid of March, and this is where the lockdown situation started coming up, where it was decided that the schools, colleges, and universities, they would be closed, and all the schoolers would be going towards remote learning. And this was a time when this was a pressure situation which came up, and across the board, whether it's a university, school, or a college, this discussion suddenly picked up and started, and everybody started experimenting with all sorts of platforms they had. So because I work for Microsoft and I'm the education lead, so I would not be discussing the other platforms, and but yes, everybody picked up whatever they were thinking is the right choice at that point in time, because this was something new. Digital maturity and readiness probably was not there across all the corners. So when you take a look at the landscape, and I would take a couple of minutes to explain that how does the landscape looks like. So there are three categories of learners in Pakistan. So there are kids, and we are talking to today, who are going to private schools, and then that's the first category, and I would say that's the category which is a blessed one. The second tier of students are those which goes to public sector schools and colleges, and that's the second category. And last, but very importantly, very close to my heart, are those kids which are out of school. So there are 25 to 30 million kids in Pakistan which were always out of school, and they were not going to the public sector organizations, institutions, and they were not going to the private sector schools as well. And now with this pandemic and post mid-March timeframe, everybody was housed, and there were no schools and universities opened up. And even today, when I work with the governments, and when I try to seek what's the roadmap, when we'll be back to the old normal, as we say. So we don't have a clear roadmap as of now, and we don't know because the situation is not improving, unlike other parts of the world. So this was a particular point where obviously, and I would just curtail the discussion towards the private sector schooling, because today we are talking to a subset. So challenges are sort of unique as well, because this is a market, and I would take an example of my own home. So while working for a tech organization for past many years, probably my setup was also not ready to combat this environment. So there could be very small issues where, let's say, if you have got 2 to 3 kids, and then they were going to the school, but probably you had just one device, and you never had one device per kid. And then this online learning situation started up, and then in the first few days there was just one device, and there were 3 kids who had to take their online classes, and probably it was not possible. Then the immediate questions arises that, okay, you will go and you will have to get more devices, because today the new normal says that there has to be a device per kid. Fair enough. The second latitude of the discussion would come in where you would see that, okay, I have a certain internet bandwidth which I have. And in most of the cases in homes in Pakistan, we are having the shared internet bandwidth, and we don't have fiber optics going down, and we don't have dedicated connections, and the internet penetration is also very low. Still, internet is not a utility. It's still, I would say, a semi-luxurious item which we have. And at that point in time, there was a limited internet bandwidth, and everybody is going, and people are working from home in the same house, and then people are doing online learning. So internet bandwidth becomes a challenge. And then obviously you have to pool in extra funds and things, and you'll go, and then you'll have that internet upgraded and ensuring the quality of service and all these things. And at the third tangent would the technology come in. So schools also started experimenting with one tool or the other tool. And in the case of city school, so I remember in the initial days, because I'm also a parent of city school, Microsoft Teams was not the tool which was introduced in the first go. It came after a month or 2 months time frame, because there were experimentations going on. And obviously, when you go, you acquire another technology, you onboard people. And the thing which other colleagues mentioned over here is very pertinent. That change management is a very tedious task, because kids, you need to understand and I would not take a lot of time. Just two things from my side. Change management has two elements. One is the mental psychology of a kid who used to get up every day at 7 a.m. and used to go to a school and play the whole day and learn and study and come back, and they used to have a life. And then you are telling them, hey, you are confined to a particular room or a particular floor, and then you are not moving here and there, and yet you have to run your business as normal. So they are not the remote workers, they are not the professionals, they are kids, and they have got their own challenges. Second is the technology itself. When you are virtualizing a classroom experience, then there's a lot of hit and try and a lot of learning. So I would say in Pakistan, in private sector schools, the kids are blessed. Somehow devices, internet, and technology is managed. Online learning has started, and slowly and gradually we are learning. But once it comes to public sector institutions, I think a lot of work needs to be done, and we are working with government as Microsoft to make sure that everybody gets technology on the equal level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that very comprehensive update about the specifics of the Pakistan sector. We'll come back to some of those points later on in the webinar. We'll like to give you the opportunity now just to kind of recap on what you think the key learning points have been for you over the past few months.
Yeah, absolutely. So the really change has been happening for a long time, obviously. I mean, that's what all of us are involved in the world of education. The world outside education is changing, and has changed certainly in the last 10, 20 years at a rapid pace. In education, I think many of us feel that change hasn't happened as fast as it has happened outside of the world of education. And so one of the things we've really seen in this period is that the acceleration of that change. It's sort of like an inflection point where some schools, some systems were prepared and getting prepared, but this has really created that platform where everyone realizes things need a change, and we can embrace this change and make the best out of technology that we've not really done so far. And so that's sort of been the biggest thing for me, is the realization across the world that there's a lot we can change for good. The second thing, though, is that there's a lot of good in the traditional system that we need to keep that needs to keep happening, and I know we're going to talk about that in the future. But I've really seen in conversations across the world, but also from a personal perspective of my own children, the role of the teacher and the pressure on teachers. And I think everyone has really had a newfound respect on teachers and teaching as a profession, how difficult it is, but also when going through talking about change management, going through such a rapid change that everyone has had to over the last few months, has put a huge amount of pressure. And so I think what we can, looking forward, what we need to do is support that role of the teacher as much as we can in the future, and make the best out of that. And so, yeah, from my point of view, those are the key ones. The other I would add is about the one size fits all view, and that actually that I think there's been a lot of thought about that and talk about that over time, but it's really come in over this period, the COVID period, that the difference between, say, synchronous learning, everyone learning the same thing at the same time, versus asynchronous learning, where there's a realization that people do learn at different speeds and do learn and pick up things at different times and benefit from individual or personalized or group-based learning as much as they can from an entire class learning something with a teacher up at the front saying, remember this and learn this. So I think that view of the one-size-fits-all model starting to disappear, and we'll talk about what may go in the future. I think that's one of the things that we've all learned and seen, that one-size-fits-all doesn't work.
Thank you. Yeah, and that kind of leads us nicely to my next question. But what I thought sort of mid-April, and it was one of those kind of light bulb predictions, that we'll see a spike in teacher training applications next year. And that will be, I think, largely as a result of a lot of people who situation and thrust into teaching at home, now actually seeing the attractiveness of the profession as a whole. So I think we won't see it until next year, but I think we'll see a lot of people see the teaching profession in a much better light, as you've said, and think, you know what, I could probably have a crack at this, and I'd like to get more experience doing it. So I think for me that might be one of the really positive signs from the current situation. So just moving on to the kind of next topic, I'd like to think about what trends we think have been accelerated, and then what legacies do we think have been washed away. So I'd like us to think about that, and look at, you know, what technology has done as a result of the situation. And you've mentioned the synchronous and asynchronous teaching, but, you know, I'd like us to think, you know, what do we think will necessarily be washed away, not in the short term, but in the long term. What do we think is going to happen? So if I could put that question to James to start us off.
Yeah, but Will's already been talking about Century Tech and how they've been supporting that personalised learning and learning on the pace that a student does learn. One thing that will support that we need to kind of address further is how students learn. We recently did a survey with some of our students, from 45,000 students across schools around the world that have engaged. And we were asking them about how do they feel about doing some of the work and activities at home. And some were saying, yes, we love it, we work much better. Others were saying, actually, it's more challenging. So obviously, different learners will learn in different ways. We've got to start accelerating how we support that personalisation, differentiation. The role of the teacher's got to change. Traditionally, you know, the teacher's standing in front of the classroom and delivering and assessing. That's going to have to evolve, and we have started to do that, but I think that's got to be accelerated very quickly to show actually the role of the teacher as a facilitator to students learning is going to become more important. I hate to say it as a trend, because it shouldn't be a trend, but the importance of soft skills, the grit, the resilience, how students are going to have the independence to learn on their own is going to become much more important. And that obviously then feeds into the role of the teacher as a facilitator, so the student can learn independently and then be able to be supported with the teacher's role at that point.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I think the part about the soft skills is so important. I just know from my own children, the skills they've learned, they've become a lot more independent as well from the situation. So hopefully that is something that is accelerated in the not so distant future. Gibran, can I point the question towards you now? What do you think will be accelerated, and what sort of legacy issues will be washed away as a result of what we've all gone through, or still going through in your case?
Yeah. So in my personal view, like as a parent, I would definitely want schools to open up and kids should go back to the schools and life should resume as a normal. Uh, but then on the other hand, there are certain ground realities in place, and we have to be very well versed with those as well. So in my opinion, there are a few things which are very pertinent when we are talking about the digital and the role of digital in education. Digital was always there. It's just that the adoption was not there. So, for example, a remote learning platform like Microsoft Teams, it was there for last 3 years, and for past many years there were many digital tools which were there. It's just that we were not adopting it, and we were not seeing the change coming in. Change was already there when Netflix replaced and became the largest cinema provider. Alibaba became the largest shopping mall, and Facebook became the largest media company on the planet. So the change was unprecedented. Change was there. We have entered into the fourth industrial revolution, and this is where tech skills and soft skills, I would agree with other panelists, were very pertinent. But it's just that there were other options as well, and then we were probably exercising those, and digital was not getting the right attention. So one thing in all these unfortunate scenarios and circumstances, that digital got the right attention, and this is where we saw things and the magic happening. So moving forward, there would be two scenarios in my view. One is for a certain period of time, for next few months down the road, maybe 2 to 3 quarters. I think we still need to bank on this remote learning. Remote learning would not replace the day-to-day interaction which we were having in the schools and colleges and universities. But still, if things are closed, they are shut. It's a lockdown situation. It's a pandemic situation. Then obviously, we can try bridging the gap as much as possible. And I think if we give a fair credit to the digital technology, it is working out to a certain extent. Yes, the process of change management is very big, and it would take next couple of years to bridge the gap of change management because it's something fairly new. But then once let's say we are back to the old normal and we are right there on the campus, the digital technology should not go away. Digital technology by any means is not going away. Why? Because we were always talking about this blended learning, and blended learning has to be there. So when my kids were coming back home, and I used to see other kids and students in the country because I work closely with them, and then obviously during the weekends, during holidays, during the off-campus hours, there's a lot of tedious tasks. If I've not gone to the school, I've missed a class. Okay, so now how would I know what happened in the entire day in the school? And this is where that async mode of learning would always help, because if a class is happening, it is recorded and that is pushed to a, a streaming service or a solution. Then even if I'm not attending the class and I'm the only person who did not attend the class, I don't have to make the call downs, and I don't have to ask anybody or lose my patience. I just have to go and see the recorded lecture. If I have to communicate or collaborate with my teacher or a work group during the weekends, I know they are there. A group is set up already over there on the digital tool, and it could be any digital tool, and there I'm done. If I'm sitting in the summer vacations, there is no need of going and picking up the homework and submitting it back and making and trying to find out what's happening and then getting the answers after 2 to 3 months. Everything is there. Everything is online. So in my particular view, an optimistic scenario would be of a blended learning. And very lastly, the fellow panelist very rightly pointed out, teachers are the ambassador of change. And this is where, with City School, we are working very closely with them. And there's a big pool of teachers, probably 800 to 1,000 teachers, who this year would become Microsoft Innovative Expert Educators. And by that, we mean that whatever tools and technologies City School is using, which are coming from Microsoft, so teachers would have the first-hand knowledge on that, and they would be able to run all these things. So the work is already in progress. And then saying that change management has to be there, but then these are those little concrete steps which we are taking, and I'm very appreciative of the team, of the IT team of City School there, I think, taking these steps in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Gibran. Yeah, really, really comprehensive, and hopefully those things are being washed away slowly but surely. But I'd like to think that certain trends being accelerated, especially around the blended learning aspects, because I think you're right. I think there is a best practice model there. I think 100% online for a lot of children, a lot of parents, isn't the right approach. But the development of those soft skills still needs to be harnessed, so that perhaps there is a better mix there. Will, I'd like to ask you what you think is going to be accelerated, or what has been accelerated already, and then perhaps from a legacy standpoint, what do you think is going to be the biggest legacy that kind of washes away in the next few months?
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, just thinking about that, I mean, what needs to stay the same? I mean, the role of schools will stay the same. There are three key elements of that. I mean, we're preparing children for the future, to shape the future of society, and that's really about importing knowledge to the student. It's about sort of the social environment that they're in, so they can build the soft skills, and it's custodial care and development. And those elements are critical. They have to stay the same. The mode of delivery is what may change for some of it. And I love that notion of blended learning. And it has to be a blended solution. And so what will accelerate is that move to a more blended learning model, in person, online, face-to-face, and digital in there together. And for me, that's where we've got to use this, very difficult, bad situation to take the positives out of it and use it as that inflection point, to make sure that we can push the change that has been coming for a long time and make it deep rooted into education. And that's around that blended model, using technology to improve student outcomes, to support teachers and allow them to come back. Often when we look at the role of a teacher worldwide, it can be, there's a lot of administrative burden on it. Using technology to take a lot of that administrative burden away and freeing them up, empowering them to teach and to facilitate is a real opportunity from this. What will move away? I think, I mean, in reaction to that, the traditional model of teaching up at the front, we've had a shift from maybe a blackboard to a whiteboard in many schools, but not much else. And I think the opportunity here is to move away from rote learning up at the front of the class to be a facilitator and working in an asynchronous way with students to support their development. Another thing which I'm sure we'll probably come on to is around assessment and the role of assessment and how that will change. And I think one of the really interesting opportunities here is around sort of continuous assessment, the old model of external public exams. It can be looked at a little bit in this post-COVID world as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of momentum now to make change and to make deep-rooted change, to improve student outcomes, to harness technology for the best, but also to ensure that the traditional, what is great about the traditional system that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years around the role of the teacher and supporting the building of soft skills in the classroom continues and even gets empowered.
Thanks. That's really, really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, what I found interesting about the past few months is that virtual schooling has existed for over 15 years in other parts of the world, and for example, K-12 in the US was the first company to have 1 million students online. And they've spent years developing their system so that a student can have a seamless experience online. And we've talked, we've touched on the synchronous and asynchronous aspects of learning, and we've now touched on assessment. And what I'd like to just explore now is some of these key themes of pedagogy, of teaching, of learning. So I think I'd like to ask James specifically how you think assessment will change or will evolve in the future, and theoretically, if a blended model did continue, or if in some cases a virtual model continued, what would assessment look like for students in the future?
Assessment is going to evolve. In the immediate future, what's going to be important is that teacher judgment is still key to understanding how students are learning. There's formalized assessments that take place at the end of each year that are still critical to understand students' progress on benchmark data. The ultimate high stakes assessments, we had a question earlier about, will the exam boards change how assessments and the type of assessment? That's a much bigger a debate that I think will ultimately come on. How can those exams be done virtually? One of the key things about assessment is, what should we be measuring? It comes back to my point earlier. How can we measure some of those softer skills to make sure that we are developing those independent learning skills, the resilience and grit that we need students to be able to conduct self-learning as needed. As the future use of technology evolves, we will have to start thinking about what is the benefit of standardized data. How do we use that in the new world? How do we use that with teacher judgment? One thing that we always have to remember, and I was talking with my old teacher, Gerg Rouse, who's at Kidzania, quite often we don't trust, or society doesn't trust teachers' judgment as well as they should. So this year, where teachers have actually had to put their predicted grades down to support the final examination grade, teachers generally do know how well their learners are performing. And I think we need to put more trust in teachers to use that level of assessment alongside some key stakeholder data and standardized data that will support that big picture. So I mean, assessment is a jigsaw puzzle. There's never going to be one answer that solves everything. That will evolve. And at the end of every topic or module, the data that the teacher can then generate on how well that learner has learned and what they've gained will be key.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, really interesting points. I mean, I'm really interested to see how assessment evolves, because obviously it's so important, and potentially in a blended or an online world, the use of data, as you've mentioned, is just critical for not only for the teachers but for the students as well, to know where they are. So I'd like to ask Gibran. Obviously, you're the Microsoft lead partner. I'd like to understand what does an online seamless experience look like for a student? How should a student navigate their online experience?
Right. So this is a question which I get literally every day. And how does the success criteria looks like? Whether it's a smooth running of this particular meeting or a call, or how do we gauge the success? So in my personal view, when we are talking about virtualizing the classroom experience, I think we go little bit wrong at some point in time. And what we are doing is we are talking about just virtualizing the teacher-student interaction through an audio-video conferencing facility. That's just one bit of it. But when you go to a classroom environment, you chat, you communicate, you collaborate with people all around. Then obviously you communicate as well with them, and then there is more into it. So your content is always available there. You're carrying books, you have got notepads and registers, and when you are going to a virtualized environment, those things are not there. When we brought in Microsoft Teams with City School, actually we looked on those things which are beyond audio video conferencing or chatting. Because audio video AV and chat is something, and IM is something which is the basic, and which is not necessarily creating that classroom environment in effect. Where is the whiteboard? So whiteboard has to be there. So where is my content, my class notebook, and all these things? They are there as well. Where is my academic calendar? It has to be there as well. The way periods are defined and all these things. Then when it comes to the next steps, there has to be a process of assignments, quizzes, and grading. And I think just a couple of days ago, they have concluded their examinations on Microsoft Teams, and I personally witnessed it. Where using the power of Microsoft Forms and other technologies, the assessments and the assignments were done seamlessly, and I think it's participated in them, and the marking was done, and the marks were given to it, and the entire academic workflow and the entire academic process that has to be built into the technology. So it's something which was also not given for a company like Microsoft. Technology was there, but now when the adoption has increased very rapidly across the board, and touching like 70, 80 million users across the globe, uh, in just a couple of months time frame, this is where you would find and you would see that on monthly basis we are investing very heavily into the product, and every month there are like 20, 30 new features coming up into Microsoft Teams. When we started off, there was no hand raise feature, and then we learned that okay, a classroom needs a hand raise feature. It came, and then there was a video calling support, which was only for like 5 people at one time point in time, and now 49 people can, not now, in a month's time frame, 49 people can open up their videos and they can do these things. And there are many features like attendance was not there, it was we invested back. So I personally think uh, we are all working and learning towards the same joint mission, and this is where there's a lot of learning for us as Microsoft. There's a lot of learning for customers as well, and there is an immense amount of learning for parents as well. So while you guys were having the discussion and sharing the points, I was just sneaking into the live comments which were coming in from the Facebook, and I think if you just scroll through this, so first I thought everything is happening, everything is coming very positive. So I thought that maybe these are the filtered comments, and then I saw a couple of comments which were against the entire idea, and this is where I realized okay, these are the genuine comments, and these are the unfiltered comments as well. So two things which I picked up. One thing from one of the comments I read that okay, these guys will push for online learning because it is our job. Yes, I take pride in my job, and I'm sure other panelists as well. Because if this online option was not there, remote learning was not happening. So imagine a situation where my kid is sitting in a blackout environment, and it's been 3 months, and that kid is not in touch with the school and the teacher and with other kids in the class. So personally, I'm very thankful to this tech world, which is helping us to fight this pandemic in a way and trying to bring us as close to the normal as we could. So that's the first thought. And very lastly, a very great point shared by a lot of people is that teachers are working very hard because they are the ambassadors of change, and then parents are also saying that it is also something becoming a challenging task for them as well. So this is where I particularly think that, and I'm happy to extend my personal support as well to the TCS team further, that we should also organize things around building the capacity for parents as well, because there are kids who are not into the higher rank classes, and parents are operating these tools, and maybe not all parents are versed with the technology. This is and even kids who are into the higher grades classes, still parents need to go and check back in their classroom, because parent teacher meetings and these things are not happening. What is happening today is happening online. So I personally think one call to action is that there has to be a series of webinars and capacity building engagements, not only for teachers, which we are doing, but also for the parents. That's my learning from these live feeds.
Yeah, could I pick up on the parent and data point? Because I think that's actually one of the big learnings or insights, even personally, during the pandemic and school closures. Obviously, parents have been thrust into a bit of a role of teacher, or often the role of teacher. And that has come with some positives and negatives. I mean, positive, they get to spend more time with their children and to be involved in teaching. But then negative in that, wow, I'm not a teacher, how do I do this? But it's changed the dynamic of how they see progress and perceived progress of their child. Because often, you know, in the traditional school system, you send your child off to school, they go off to learn, they'll tell you a little bit at the end of the day of what they've done, probably less than what most parents want. And then you hear from the teacher at the end of the term on how they're doing, and you see the results of some tests. But actually, when learning's happening at home, you're seeing every day and every minute, every hour, what your child is doing or isn't doing, how they're getting on with one particular task or not. So as a parent, that gives you access to more insight on how your student's doing. But that can be difficult as well, because you can drop into a world of micromanaging or thinking, oh gosh, didn't do well on this, what does that mean? Didn't do well on that, what does that mean? And so I think there's a really interesting thing that's going to come out of this, is around the role of parents and how schools work with parents to keep parents involved, to communicate perhaps a bit better than has been in the past, and to share a better view of how their child is getting on. And I think some of the best, without plugging Century, us, but also some others, have great portals for the parents to be able to see how their students are getting on real time, and to be able to see what the strengths and weaknesses are, what the gaps in knowledge are of that particular student at any time, and where they should focus to plug those gaps and to hit the curriculum objectives and get the best results. And for me, I think that's a really big learning. And a really big opportunity for schools and school groups to bring the parent into the conversation, to communicate in a more robust way in the future. And I think for parents, they will get the ability to engage a bit more, but probably don't want to, as a generalization, probably don't want to be as involved as they've had to be over this COVID period, but will want to stay closer to their child's progress.
That's really interesting. Yeah, sorry, James.
I was going to say, following Will's comments, I mean, some of the schools I've been working with, and I think back to my teaching days here in London and Thailand, that relationship with parents is going to be critical going forward. And some of the schools that have really embraced the challenge of the last few months have had really strong, I would say, contractual relationships between parents and teachers. Probably what we need to have going forward is a parent, student, teacher contract that explains what each person's role is in that learner's education, and how technology through different platforms or online teaching resources or developing the soft skills becomes critical. Because it's definitely a partnership that needs to be established in the near future, as opposed to, I think traditionally, schools are seen as, my child goes to school and everything happens there, and they come home and we want to see the progress. Is beginning, it's got to be a much more of a relationship approach.
That's great. Well, I'd like to stick with the topic of parents just for a second, and it's, I think the behaviours that you've described and the observations around parental involvement are really important. I had the privilege, I interviewed a couple of parents last week just about their experience. And one of the comments that really stood out was around the idea of the school identity and the social aspect of the learning. And one of the parents said, unfortunately, since we've gone to online learning, our school is kind of indistinctive. And the children have forgotten which house they're in. We haven't really done any of the social elements of learning. There hasn't really been any assemblies or any breakout sessions where the children can just interact online. It's mainly been about resources, delivering resources, complete these tasks. So from a parent's perspective, if a parent is choosing a school and they're basing it on the quality of the school's online learning, what kind of characteristics should they look for? I'd like to start with you, Will. What should parents look for when choosing a school?
Interesting. And I think, I was just thinking of parallels with actually work life, in that, schools going through this change have been very similar to companies and organizations going through this, that a lot of our companies for the first time, and most people on listening in will have had to start working from working from home or working remotely, and interacting and socializing remotely. And there's a lot of change and challenges there in the workplace that are very relevant for schools too. And I think the schools, the companies that have managed to switch, like the schools that have managed to switch most effectively, are the ones that have been prepared and have been investing in technology in the future. In the past, ready for changes. And I think very similarly in this, how does those that are really successful are those that bring across their own culture, brand, and way of working into a remote way. And I think that's really important. And as you look across the world at different schools, there are many schools that bring that, and that's the pastoral element of a school, or the custodial element of a school, that's incredibly important, that the best schools are bringing online. And so for me, thinking as a parent, as well as thinking as someone working in the industry, a key thing for me when parents choosing schools and how to pick good schools is about their approach, the blended learning approach. But most importantly is the values of the school, and do those values align with your values, and do they fulfill and push those values through everything they do. And I think that happens in the classroom, that happens in remote and online hybrid working as well. And it's really the best schools are the ones that have strong values and push those through everything they do throughout. And I think for me, as a parent speaking, that's how I will look at it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. James, can I point that question towards you now?
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for schools to adapt to this rapidly, but a good school should be able to communicate with parents. It goes back to that relationship of, this is our role, but we need you to be doing this to support your child's learning. The blended learning, probably we're talking about blended learning and pedagogy because we're in education, but there's going to be some need where schools will have to explain how students learn. So that blended approach, or what students are expected to do independently, and then how that will be supported with the face-to-face time, whether that's physically face-to-face in a school for some of the time, or whether it's a virtual face-to-face, is key. Many parents and many schools might just be assuming online learning is a Teams meeting after Teams meeting after Teams meeting, which it definitely isn't, what it shouldn't be. I'd be looking for the pastoral and the well-being element. And I come back to my experience of having a virtual team. I have to think how I support my team now when they're based at home. So when we're having a training session, I need to be thinking, actually, what do I want them to do before the session? So our face-to-face time on Zoom would be beneficial. But then at the same time, how am I supporting their well-being while they're at home? So I've seen some schools begin to think about building a pastoral stream. So in school, you'll have students with specific needs that might go and see a mentor. How can we embed that into this new virtual world where students are supported both pastorally as well as academically? The relationship between students within is the other challenge, and as you said, that kind of the house system might fall away. Schools need to be able to find different ways of building a community while students are remote, so when they come together they still feel quite close. And talking about my team here at GL, some people that I wouldn't necessarily see as much because I'll be overseas and they're in the office, I feel that we've actually got a stronger relationship now, so when we meet together we will have a stronger a bond and understanding. But that takes time, and it's not going to happen without a structure in place to support the social cohesion within a school.
Fantastic, thank you, James. And Gibran, I'd like to put two questions to you, and then we'll go to the audience for some questions. So my first question is, from the parents' perspective in Pakistan, how could parents choose a school based on the quality of its online or blended learning? And my second question to you, Gibran, is what does a post-COVID-19 education sector in Pakistan look like?
Right. So as a parent, personal view, I would definitely go and choose a school which is supporting the digital learning and has a digital first roadmap available, working for the tech sector and knowing that digital is the next big thing. So definitely I would go and would choose such a school. But then there are certain other peripherals around that as well. And I would also want my kid to go to a school where there's a lot of emphasis on physical activity and sports. I see this element sort of diminishing in the Pakistan education sector, the way we are housed today, and then in the schools and the size of campuses. So I would want really all schools should follow a certain pattern where physical activities and sports are encouraged. That is very fundamental. Besides being you are a digital school or digital campus, then there has to be a lot of focus which needs to go onto the inculcating the essence of civic engagement, because when you're graduating with a degree and you're not contributing back to the society and solving the real world problems with the skills we have learned, uh, I personally think it's not of any use. So that notion of civic engagement has to be inculcated. And last but not least, I would prefer a school which is the future school and is focusing on future ready skills, because that future ready job market, both in the context of soft skills plus tech skills, has changed entirely. So I think, and there's a very good course on 21st century learning design published by Microsoft for educators. And I would encourage the educators and academicians to go and take that course and that framework to understand how does the future 21st century market looks like. And then I think we need to gear up our kids, because then again, people are graduating with degrees and all these things, and the joblessness is increasing because probably the output which we are producing is not sort of needed in the market. And I would not take a lot of time, but this is something, a pointer on which we need to maybe have a separate discussion around. Lastly, in my view, there would be still few more months with this remote learning thing, and then I think then things, inshallah, should resume and go back to normal. But again, with the promise that we will not throw away the digital and would not use it as a makeshift arrangement. It would be part of the entire strategy, and then the future learning would be a blended learning where technology is providing the assistance. Technology is augmenting our intelligence. Technology is making us more productive, but then physical interaction and day-to-day commute is also there. That's my view.
Thank you, Gibran. Really, really interesting and some really valid points there. We've got around, I would say, around 10 minutes, just under 10 minutes, to look at any of the comments or questions from the viewers. There's already been a ton of comments and questions come in throughout the webinar. So one of the consistent points that's been posted has been around the idea of price and school fees. So if I could just put this to you, James, what do you think the relationship is between price and online learning, and perhaps what should that look like in the future?
That's a very challenging question, because obviously the world is rapidly changing. Ultimately, the role of a teacher becomes more challenging, and to be able to facilitate a child's learning almost takes more preparation and more understanding of that learner to support them in a virtual world. Yes, there's going to be some great tools, and there already are some great online learning tools that support that child to learn. But then the role of the teacher is so important. We all know, and if we all think back to our time in the classroom, we all have a teacher that we know was passionate for us, and they've developed us to the person that we are today. Paul Nevins, my geography teacher, Gerg Rouse, my German teacher, they have a huge impact on who I am and how I've developed. So that role of the teacher is still critical, and the role of the teacher in supporting the learning is going to be fundamental. So yes, even though some learning may be done at home and we don't see what the teacher's doing face to face, either not in front of standing in front of a classroom for 6 hours a day, their role behind the scenes becomes even more critical. So when it comes to understanding the value of what a school provides for a child's learning, I don't think it changes. It just evolves into a different way.
Another question here, another statement. I think I'll put this to you, Will. How do we solve the digital divide between teachers using devices? And I mean, the same principles might apply to parents as well, but what sort of practical strategies would you suggest?
And so, but in terms of divide, you mean access to the technology?
Access and also skill set. You know, obviously, you know, in every country there are different ages of teachers. Not to generalize about skill set with any particular age, but just from my own personal experience of the first 2 weeks of lockdown, I had to use more devices and more things that I'd never used before, and it would quite frequently result in lots of bad words being used. So I mean, what practical things could you advise schools to kind of upskill teachers in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, so a big part of that is training, obviously. And so professional development, continuous professional development training is obviously critical. The other thing is obviously picking the right tools. And I think one of the learnings for many schools has been that they've had some schools have had lots of different online platforms and technology. Some have had very little or few. But interestingly, they're both sort of merging into the middle in that you don't want too many because it can become too confusing and becomes difficult for teachers, for students, multiple passwords, multiple different user interfaces. So I'd say sort of going into a few high quality resources is incredibly helpful and useful. And then the training is critical. So providing good quality training for teachers, but also for students and parents is useful. And I think as the edtech industry, making the online platforms and resources as user-friendly and easy to use as possible is and there are lots of tools, perhaps traditionally, that were overly complicated, because let's face it, we're dealing with a lot of data there. There's sort of constant assessment data. There are multiple students, multiple schools, multiple settings. It can become very complicated very quickly. So good user interfaces, quality and continuous training is absolutely critical, but ongoing support as well. So obviously with school systems like with the city school, the great benefit is you've got a network across the whole country of professionals who can support and can be there to help teachers that have any problems, because there's nothing worse than being live in a class. You're trying to teach something and say at the front of the class and something goes wrong or you're not comfortable with it. So having that support and practice is absolutely critical as well.
Thank you. Gibran, we've got a very specific question here, which I'd like to put to you on Microsoft Teams. Eve has said, since Microsoft Teams has been working for over 3 years, is there something that has not yet been implemented, and what can make the learning even better for the students? So without revealing your sort of industry secrets, what do you think in the future the enhancements could be for students?
Right. So I think there is no secret sauce. The only thing is whatever feedback we are getting from the field, that we are making sure we are taking that feedback back to the engineering. And then that feedback could come in two ways. One is that there's a feature which you see in some other technology and you want to have it in Microsoft Teams. That is one kind of a feedback. Another feedback is that there was a certain process which had to be done and which was not done. So that feedback is already there. And then when it comes to Microsoft, obviously there is a product roadmap and things, but then there are a lot of things which are open as well. So I would encourage everybody who is interested in Microsoft Teams to go and visit two websites which Microsoft has officially published. One is Office 365 Roadmap, because Teams is a subset of Office 365 technology. And whatever we do that for months ahead of the release of a certain feature, that is already shared on that particular portal from where people can go and they can find out what's next coming into the product. That's one thing. Second is, if you don't find that particular thing on Office 365 roadmap, and you don't find that particular thing even on the latest version of Microsoft Teams, then the way is that there is a user voice forum which we have opened up. So today, if you'll go and visit user voice forum, there are going to be tons of requests coming in from across the world, which are being monitored by the product groups and the engineering teams. And then the beauty of the product is that, unlike the old days, the new version of Teams does not come after 1 year or 2 year. The new version of Teams comes every month. So we push these updates via cloud, and every month there are security fixes and performance improvements, but there are new features as well. So, for example, there's a feature of class insights, which is just recently shipped a few days ago. And now you can go and you can take the insights on the class, how students and teachers are communicating and collaborating, and how classes are being conducted. This was not there 10, 15 days ago. Attendance feature was not there a month ago. And then 3 months ago, Teams was totally a different product. So I believe that every product has got limitations, and the room for improvement and enhancement that has to be there. But the best product is that which is adopting things very quickly. And I can very proudly say that Teams has listened to the feedback and the voice of the community, and these things come very quickly. So in case there's a particular request, people can always reach out to me or Umar from the IT team of City School, and they can park their request with us.
Thanks, Gibran. Well, look, that the hour has gone exceptionally fast. We've covered some really good topics here. I'd like to thank all of the panelists: Will Locke, the Director of International for Century Tech, James Neal, the International Director of GL Education, and Gibran Jamshed, the Country Lead for Microsoft Education in Pakistan. I'd also like to thank all of the listeners for all of the comments and all of the questions that have come through. Some really good questions that we could explore and certainly look at in another session. I hope that we've answered a lot of the questions today. So I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and look out for the next session in the not so distant future through the City School website and the City School pages. So thanks very much to the panelists, and I wish you all a happy and safe time in the not so distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.